What's your name?
Lee Raymond McDonald.
Very good. I've lost my mind. Okay, where did your parents come from?
Okay, well, my mother was born and raised here in Castle, in Amalga and Logan. And Dad was born and raised in Florida.
Oh, so how did he end up here?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but his folks joined the church in Florida, and there were no schools beyond about the 6th grade there at the time. And that was at the same time that Brigham Young College was in Logan, where Logan High School is now.
Really?
And not BYU, this is BYC,
Oh, okay.
Brigham Young College. And it was a high school, and if you went, I think it went to the 9th grade, and then if you went 2 more years, or 3 years, then you could get a teaching certificate.
Oh.
Anyway, Grandma and Grandpa McDonald decided to send their 2 boys out here to go to school.
Oh, so that's
And it was a church school, and so that was why.
That's good.
And on his end of the family, we've kind of hit a dead end where they all come from. It was either Ireland or Scotland or both. And they had been in this country for quite some time. But we've traced them to North Carolina in about the early 1800s, and it kind of fades away. On my grandmother's side of that family, they go way back to the Revolutionary War,
Oh, wow.
but it's awful sketchy. Now on mother's side, both her parents, Grandpa and Grandpa Peterson, their folks joined the church in England. And then they come out. They were immigrants. Now, Grandma Peterson was an Ash. Her maiden name was Ash. And they were in the first handcart company.
Oh, wow.
And he was a gunsmith. He was trained as a gunsmith in England. And when he got here, he opened his own shop, and that's how he made a living. And Grandpa Peterson, they come later. 10 or 15 years later. When Grandma comes, she was only 2.5.
Oh, wow.
And she had a little sister that come with him, and her mother carried that little kid all the way across the plains.
Wow.
They got here, it died.
Oh.
Let's see, what else? Anyway, they were just common old hard-working people, and none of them had ever farmed. They come from England, from big cities, Birmingham, and here they are trying to milk cows and plow ground, and they had no experience at all. Anyway, they were the first handcart company.
Wow.
And there was 2 handcart companies come together. Grandpa Ash's, and then the one right behind them was McBride. They almost traveled together as a single company, and then it was right after them that the Willie and Martin and Willie come 2 months later, and they're the ones that got caught in the snow. When they were fighting, the snowstorm was about the time my folks got to Salt Lake, so they just missed that. And then go back to Dad's side. He stayed out here for a year, going to school in Ogden first, and then he got homesick and went home. He was only 17 or 18.
Yeah.
And he went home for a year and got homesick to come back
So how did they meet?
at BYC.
Yeah.
That's where they met. And they both, Dad was the class president in 1914. And I think Mother was the same year. And then in 1916 they got married. But in the meantime, before they got married, they both taught school.
So was your dad a teacher then?
No, he taught shop class for a couple of years, and that just was not his bag.
So what was his profession?
So he was a carpenter.
Oh, was he?
And I got some of his work still around. I'll have to show you.
You have to.
And Mother taught grade school out in Paradise.
Oh, wow.
They complain about overcrowded. Now she had 40 kids with 3 different grade levels.
Yeah, but she got to spank him if she wanted to, so
Yeah.
that's good.
Anyway, they got married, and on mother's side, her mother and dad, they homesteaded some ground out in Amalga, and eventually bought more and more. They had almost 500 acres out there, but it was all dry land. And when they sold the farm in about 1919, the year after the First World War was over, Grandma and Grandma Peterson took Mother and Dad on a 3 months vacation
Wow.
back to Florida. And so the in-laws got to
Got
meet.
to meet. Well, that's cool.
And there's a lot of other stories that go with it, you know.
That's what we're doing.
Oh.
Tell stories.
Well, you got the book that I give out at the,
I didn't get a copy.
you didn't? Well, your mother should have.
I'll get Mom's copy.
But anyway, my great-grandfather, Edward McDonald, he moved down there in about 20 years after the Seminole War. Now, the Seminole War is where the Indians rebelled, and this stomped the hell out of the white settlers, burned their towns, and so it was almost like nobody had ever been there. And they moved in and homesteaded a place on Daytona, where Daytona Beach is now. And then they moved down the coast to a place called Port Orange. It's still there. And he built a hotel there.
Ooh, why aren't we rich?
Hmm?
Why aren't we rich then?
Well, one of the problems was he was, the story goes, was a very generous man. And travelers would come through and they'd put him up and feed them. And finally he said, geez, maybe you ought to be charging for this.
Oh,
And that hotel lasted until 1996.
really? What was it called?
Well, it was called the Alligator Inn.
Oh, because of that alligator. Well, tell the story of the alligator.
Well, it's just one of the boys caught, penned it up and teased it and fed it. And it's just a big old ugly growly alligator.
Was it to get people to come, or
Well, I think they had it before they built the hotel.
wasn't it named something?
Was it Big Jim or something like
Yes,
that?
yeah.
Anyway, he was quite an industrious guy. They used to be wreckers too. They would salvage wrecked ships.
Oh,
And that's where he got a lot of the timber and stuff for his hotel to start with. And then they would salvage goods from these ships. A lot of times the crews would be dead, and here come this ship
wow.
floating in, and they tell all kinds of stories about getting barrels of flour and stuff, and they just salvage them and sell it.
Wow. That's awesome. I wish there were ships around here.
Anyway, they eventually made one trip out here, Grandma and Grandpa, and don't know much about them. Now, on Grandma's side, Grandma Mac's side, she was a loader. That was her maiden name, and she's written a real neat history. You'll have to read it.
Yeah.
They moved down to Florida from Maryland, and so-called moved down there for her dad's health. He was poor health. And it never really worked out for him. He finally died, and her brother died, and then in the meantime she was married, and her mother and her sisters moved back to Maryland, and that's the last they ever seen of them.
Oh, really?
She stayed in Florida and raised her family.
And so that's why he.
And Grandpa, going back to Mother's side now, Grandpa Ash was quite an industrious guy, and he had a gun shop on Main Street in Logan. I finally got a picture of it. I'll show
Really?
it to you when you leave. And he worked until he was up in his 80s as a gunsmith. He didn't die until he was 95. He died in 1915. He had bad luck with wives.
Oh
He
no.
was married twice. He was married once in England, and his wife had a baby, and they both died. He remarried, and the same thing happened. And I don't know the names of those women. I haven't
Really?
been able to find out who they are. Then he married Sophie Edwards, who is our
I know the name,
grandmother. And they come across the plains and all this, and they settled in Richmond, and she died in childbirth when Grandma Peterson that I'm talking about was 8 or 10 years old, and she was the oldest of 2 or 3 other kids.
Oh, wow. So she lost. Wait, they came across the plains and lost the baby, and then she died during childbirth of another baby.
In Richmond.
Wow. So are they buried there? Do they have headstones?
Yeah, they're about the oldest graves in Richmond Cemetery.
Really?
And the Peterson, on the Grandpa Peterson side, they were real industrious. They were the first ones that had a sawmill up Logan Canyon. They were the first ones to put in a planing mill. And they eventually sold out to Anderson's, and
Really?
they're the predecessors of Anderson Lumber.
We should be rich.
Well, his brother, Grandpa Peterson had 2 brothers, and they were contractors, and they contracted the first building on the campus at USU, the south part of Old Main. Anyway, they didn't fritter away their money, but they never become wealthy. Grandpa Peterson had poor eyesight. He was a little guy, and they kind of pushed him off the side, but he was the guy that finally made it good in the farming business. When he sold that farm in 1919 for just a little under $100,000, that was a lot of money.
That's lots.
And he did a little financing of various projects around with some of that money. The city of Paradise borrowed some money from him to put in a water system.
Really?
But he had a bunch of kids, and they did this kind of.
I didn't know we were
away.
related to Petersons.
Yeah. So that's about where I come from.
Well, let's see, mister. So, did you have traditions that came from England in your family, or
Tea
from the
drinkers.
South? Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of tea?
Well, Mother drank green tea. And she finally got the spirit one day and burned it up and quit drinking tea. And Dad, I don't know what his traditions were. They just lived off the land in Florida. There was completely opposite of what was here. People had to struggle to get anything. There, they had seafood and they had wild game and they had things easy to grow. And so it was a lot different.
Let's see. So, where did you grow up?
In Logan.
In where?
390 South 4th West.
What was your house like?
Well, it's a house that Dad built. It's still there. It's on the corner of 4th South and 4th West, right across from the fairgrounds. A nice house. By the time I come along, he remodeled it, enlarged it a little bit. And so I never remember the very first part of it. He built that in about 1920, on in there. And see, I didn't come along until 1930.
So, do you know anything about your birth or anything?
From what I am told, Mother was confined to bed for the last several months
Really?
before I was born.
So, how many siblings do you have?
I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters.
Now, where are you in the order?
I'm the 5th child. I have 2 sisters younger,
And 2.
and a sister older, and 3 brothers older.
So,
They're the 2 brothers are gone,
right.
and 1 sister is dead.
So, I know you guys got in trouble. What did you guys do for fun?
You know, I was never really a fun guy.
Really?
To just go out. As little kids, we just played around. I guess the biggest part of it was living across the street from the fairgrounds, which is a lot different than now. It was pretty wild, and we'd spent a lot of time down there in the toolies and fishing. And I really don't recall getting into a lot of mischief. There were some interesting people lived down there during the Depression that I got acquainted with. There was two people. There was the Phillips man and wife and another guy named Dan Starr. And they were horse trainers from Kentucky. And when the Depression hit, there was no work for them. So however they got here, I don't know. But they had, both of those people, converted a couple of stables that was down there and lived in them.
Oh, wow.
And Mr. and Mrs. Phillips had converted 2 of them. And they had a lived there. And Dan Starr had just one room down the line of ways. It was interesting. Everybody thinks the Depression, everybody was poor. And most everybody was, but there was still a lot of money around. And when I was a kid, I remember a lot of the guys that had money had horses. And these 2 guys trained their horses. And most of it was harness racing. You don't see that around here anymore. And that's what kept those people afloat.
So, talk about the Depression.
Well, I'm glad I can remember part of it. You know, I was born in 1930. The Depression started about the same time.
Maybe you started it.
Huh? Yeah, I probably started. Dad, there was, I was born at the start of it, and then they had 2 more kids after that. Thelma was born in 32 and Ruth in 34. And, you know, when you're 5 or 6 or 7 years old, you can remember quite a bit. The money was really tight. They had the house. They were making payments on the house, $20 a month.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that was the whole
I
week's
believe
pay
it.
or more. And he worked for Anderson Lumber at that time. And at that time in the Anderson Mill, they called it, you didn't go down to Home Depot and buy a door and a frame already set. If you was going to build a house, you ordered your doors and windows 6 months ahead of time, and they'd make them up from scratch. That's what he did there, and cabinets and all that stuff. But he was out of work a lot. I remember him coming home one day, and he said, "Here's a check for 75 cents." And he kidded his mother, "Well, should we cash it or frame it?" Well, they cashed it.
Well, that's good.
But he had 2.5 acres on that corner, and a big garden, and we had a couple of cows, and always had chickens, and raised a couple of pigs every year. Well, that's how we lived. That was Mother bottled.
Is that how
lots.
everybody did? Is that how everybody did?
Pretty
Mostly.
much everybody. Most people hardly ever get much out of the store. There was no prepackaged goods, so we didn't have much garbage. We had a few canned goods, you know, like tuna fish and other things. You know, you'd hardly ever collect anything but tin cans as garbage because you'd burn everything that was burnable.
Did you have like a toy that you loved, or
I had a tricycle that I loved.
yeah? Was it a red one?
It was a red one, and I rode the wheels right off of it. I really wasn't much on toys. They bought me a scooter one time for Christmas, like the scooters they have now, only had bigger wheels. They were really nice. But I didn't have a favorite toy.
So, did you have any relatives that were your favorite? You remember?
Aunt Bina and Aunt Ada, they were mother's sisters.
Oh, Bina. I love her.
And of course, Grandma Peterson, she lived, she was born in 1854 and died in 1954. So I was 24 when she died, so I remember her really well. And she liked to tell stories.
Ooh, what did she tell you?
Well, there was no TV, and the whole Mother and Bina and Ada, they go up there and just sit around and talk, and all our cousins and everybody would be there. So.
Well, can you remember a story that they'd tell?
Well, there were several of them. This one about my great uncle Jim Larson was a favorite story, and Uncle Les wrote a little story about him, and I've done some research on him. I'll have to show you when we're done. He was quite a character. Grandma's Peterson's brother, John Ash Jr., lived in Albuquerque. And he used to come up once a year, and that was a big event because he was a hypnotist. He'd hypnotize people.
Ooh.
And he was a little bit involved in the occult things. And I don't know what happened. Something happened that kind of scared him out of that, and he quit doing it. But he was a missionary. He went on a mission to New Zealand, and it was the first
That would be neat.
of the Maori missionaries down there.
Wow.
were missionaries to the Maori, and something happened. He was not. He finally he didn't leave the church. He just tried to disassociate himself. Married Aunt Lizzie, and she was a Catholic, and they never had any children. And I grew up thinking there wasn't any children from him.
Mm-hmm.
But I get digging into some family history. He was married once before and had 3 boys.
Oh.
And I'm trying to find out what the hell that's all about.
Huh.
So there's a lot of mystery there. He was kind of a tall and kind of a raspy voice and deep set eyes and a hooked nose. And,
Ooh. Do you have pictures of him? That'd be good.
but he was a good guy. He scared the hell out of you. He had a string of apartments in Albuquerque. Now see, this was during the Depression too, so there was some money being made. But he drove a great big Studebaker touring car. And he'd drive up. And it was a huge, huge car. And him and Aunt Lizzie would come up and visit for a while. But my aunts, I really loved my aunts.
I remember Bina. I love Bina.
Well, Aunt Ada was her oldest sister, and she died in her 70s. So
Was she a spunky lady like Bina?
she was kind of like Fern. She was kind of a nosy old gal, but she always treated me just real well.
Yeah.
She had 3 children. 2 of them are still alive. Those are my cousins, Earl, who is about 90, and Ross, who is about 85, and the girl, Maureen, just died here a year ago. But I used to think it was a great birthday party to have my aunts come. I didn't invite kids.
Just have your aunts.
Hmm. And their brother was Uncle Les, of course, Les Peterson.
Oh yeah.
Did you know him, or he probably didn't? He was a character.
Why was he a character?
Well, he kind of a ladies' man, and he was in the bishopric at one time, but he kind of drifted away, and
And went for the girls?
well, he had a good marriage, and as far as I know, a lot of it might just be stories. He had a half brother. See, Grandma Peterson was married once and had a boy, and she divorced her husband. Well, anyway, those 2 half brothers were treated pretty close together.
Mm-hmm.
Eugene Nelson was his name, and they used to go fishing and drinking, and quite a little bit. I remember this real well, and I remember one time Uncle Eugene said, "Yeah, we're just half brothers, and the more we drink, the more we're like full brothers." But they're all gone now, and Les lived to be 102.
Wow. You've got a lot of people who lived a long time in your family.
How old was Bina when she died?
103.
Yeah. And she was.
My mother lived
with
to
it?
91. So, you know, but the oldest sister that just lived into her 70s. She had cancer. It's like my dad. He died at 58. He had cancer.
And then how long did your mom live without him?
She lived without him almost as long as they lived together.
Really?
They were married for about 34 or 5 years, and she was a widow for about the same length of time.
Because mom talks about her, so she did she live with you guys?
No, she always was quite independent until she broke her pelvis, and then after that she would live in a rest home in Ogden. Layton, really.
So, did you ever have a nickname?
Butch.
Butch? Polly and Butch.
And there's only one person in this whole world that still calls me that. And
Who?
that's a neighbor girl.
Really? What's
I
her
was friends with her brother, and his name was Herbert Hawks. He's long since gone. And Pat, his younger sister, was my age. And for some reason, she just pinned that on me. And when I see her to this day, she calls me Butch.
I bet she had a crush on you.
I don't know. She married Wally long, about the same time I married Laura.
So you're Butch. That's funny. So did you have any best friends that you pal around with?
I had 2 really good boyfriends growing up, Russell Wayman and Dallas Bear. And
What'd you go do?
what did we do? Well, we'd sneak off and smoke and that kind of stuff, go fishing. And but it kind of petered out in the last year of high school because those two guys wanted to join the Army, and they did. And they both made careers out of it.
Wow.
And they wanted me to do that too, but I'd had an eye on your grandma, and I decided that was not for me, so. But we were good, we went everywhere. In our ward, there was only 3 deacons. There were 20 widows and 3 deacons in that ward. But they were good kids. Dallas is dead now. He become an alcoholic and died. Russell is moved back to Cache Valley. He's his first wife died, and he's married an old girlfriend that
Really?
is a widow, and they live out south of Logan now. So I see him once in a while.
What, did you do anything crazy ever when you were a
Throw rocks
teenager?
at street lights. When I was in high school, I was into cars a lot, did a lot of crazy stuff.
Did you have a cool car?
I had several cool cars.
Like what?
I had a 28 Model A, and that was wore out. That was a good car. And see, this was right after right at the very tail end of World War II, and there hadn't been any cars produced for years.
Right.
And so there was a bunch of old wore out clunkers around. I remember I had a 1939 Plymouth Coupe. I had a 40 Ford Coupe. And we just trade them around among kids, you know. Well, I'll give you $10 for that, or you give me 50 for this. And I don't think we ever registered them. There was
Do you
a
have
license
insurance?
plates on them. Oh, hell no, insurance.
Just driving around. Did you have a driver's license?
Oh, yeah.
That's
Well,
it.
part of that time. There was 3 of us went together and bought a 1928 Chevy, and we blew it up right off the bat.
How?
Just run it too fast. Then the best, let's see. Then I had a couple of Fords. 3. I had 2 36 Fords and a 35 Ford. And the 35 Ford was the one I used most when I was courting your grandma. But I had a 1939 Buick for a while. That was before we were married. And that was a hot car. It was a 4-door sedan. Big old Buick, they call them Buick Century. I guess they still make Buick Centuries,
Yeah.
don't they?
Mhm.
It had a straight 8 engine in it. As long as that couch damn near. It was that long, the engine. And powerful, really powerful. But it was wore out too, you know.
It's so fun though.
And I had a 1932 Indian motorcycle. I wish I still had.
Oh, really? Those, you'd have some money from that thing.
Well, it was wore out too. And I traded it for a 36 Graham Page. And that was a big mistake. But I finally unloaded that for $15, I think.
That's funny.
That's when I bought the Buick. And then I sold the Buick for something, I forget how much it was, and got that Ford that I used and then when we got married, really, I didn't have a car.
Oh.
And I borrowed my brother's, John, had a nice little Model A coupe, 32 coupe. And we drove that's what we drove on our honeymoon. I drove that for a while. And then he needed it back, and so therefore, I guess 6 months or so, I didn't have a car. I just rode my bike to work and back. And then
Where did you work?
I worked for Logan City at that time at the diesel plant, or the diesel electric. And then I bought the one I really still have dreams about. It was a 1936 Plymouth. Hardly used. It was one that had been in a guy's garage. And that was a nice car.
What color was it?
Green.
Well, how come you got rid of it?
Well, things happen, you know. I drove it when we moved to Seattle. I drove it out there. And the damn thing never run decent out there because it was so damp. Here, and all the wiring seemed like it would get damp. It didn't run very well. So I traded it in on a 1949 DeSoto. And that was a real nice car. We drove that for a long time.
You talk about those like they're your old girlfriends.
Well, they kind of were.
So, how was school? Where did you go to school?
Well, I went to the Woodruff School in Logan, and that's long gone now. That was on the corner of First West and First South. I think Century 21 building is that there, just kitty corner across the street from Logan High.
Oh yeah.
There used to be a big old 3-story building in there, and then when I was in the 3rd grade, they built a new Woodruff School, which is now part of Logan High School. That's that low part west of Logan High. And then I went to Logan Junior High, which is now a parking lot. That I was not there when it happened, but when we had that earthquake in about 63 or 4, it damaged that beyond repair, and they tore it down. That was a 3-story old school building too. That, you know where Federal Avenue and Church Street is? Okay, that parking lot in there, that's where that school used to be. We had a seminary class there in the 9th grade that was in the old, I wish they never tore that down, the old Bishop's Tithing Office is where that bank drive-through is now.
On like Federal.
Yeah. And then I went to Logan High School.
What'd you like in school?
I liked mechanics and woodworking and physics. I had a good physics teacher, Mr. Kemp. I was never tuned into school. Studying was my big downfall. I was
That's funny
involved
because you're
with,
so educated now and you read so
I
much
was
now.
really into the car thing and running around with the boys. And we used to, there was a kid while I was in high school, when I didn't have a car for a while. He had a Model A Ford Coupe, and we'd pile into that damn thing. And the gas tanks on those was right across the front, right in front of the windshield. And the gas gauge was inside, it was a float, a tube.
Oh.
You could see the gas in it. And it leaked. We get in there and light up, smoke poured out the window. It's funny we didn't blow the damn thing up.
That doesn't seem like the best design in the world.
Oh,
Yeah, why don't they build them like that anymore?
Yeah, it's
no, they don't. But it was a pretty simple gas gauge. But the bad part about it, every time you'd fill it up, you'd generally dribble gas across the hood of the. But it was all, there was no fuel pump. It was just gravity feed.
Huh. That's funny. So what'd you look like when you were a kid?
Oh, kind of dorky, I guess.
You were
I don't
cute.
know.
I've seen pictures.
Well, make your own decision then. I always liked to even though I was into mechanics, I never did enjoy getting real dirty.
Yeah.
So I always tried to dress fairly nice.
Dapper.
No, not dapper. But I never was. And then I went to 1 year of college after high school. And that was my formal education.
Very formal. So what would your classmates say about you, do you think? How would they remember you?
Kind of a wild, stupid kid that wasn't.
I got that from you.
Yeah?
I think I did.
Kind of an adventuresome, pressing the envelope kind of thing. You're getting me to admit things I haven't even.
That's what we're trying to do.
I remember one time we all got drunked up at lunch hour and went back to school.
Did you think nobody would notice?
We didn't care. That was the thing. No, we didn't care.
That's why Grandma liked you.
The bad boy.
Bad boy. You gotta love the bad boy.
I wasn't a bad boy. Just about drove the teachers nuts. I remember in the 10th grade, I was sloughing school beyond belief.
I got that from you too.
And mother, of course, I just worried the hell out of her. Bless her heart. And I had a class I hated, and that was a world history. I really love history now, but the teacher was a guy by the name of C.D. McBride, and he was the driest human being that was ever born. And to find out where in the hell I was and why my grades were so poor, she just showed up at school one day and I wasn't there.
Oh.
So she's sitting in my seat to the class. Talk about embarrassment.
Yeah. So what did she do when you got home?
Well, she read me the riot act, but she was kind of on my side because she later said, she told McBride, she says, you're teaching way over these kids' head. You belong at the university level. And I'll be damned, a couple of years later he did go to the
Really?
university. I'm not surprised he wasn't still teaching history when you were there. But he was a good guy. He was.
Right.
I had another biology teacher by the name of Gunnell. He was a real interesting teacher also.
Was he good or?
He was good. He taught biology.
I'm gonna ask you about your first kiss when you were together.
Oh, it was marvelous.
Oh.
And that's it.
Oh no, you're gonna tell me. Okay, so what was your first job?
Ever?
Yeah, sure.
For a kid to find job at that time was pretty difficult, except you felt lucky to be able to find job hoeing beets or something like that. And I had thin beets and hoed beets and top beets. And they had
Were they sugar beets?
sugar beets,
that what they were
and they were the big thing. They had what they called a beet vacation. In the fall, they'd just, when the beet harvest was on, they'd shut school off for a whole week.
Really? And then everybody just go.
And everybody would go out and top beets because it was a very labor intensive. I'll show you, you know what a beet knife looks like? You do, don't you? It's a horrible looking thing with a big hook on it. That you'd,
I think I have one. I don't know how I have it.
well,
I think I have one.
well, keep it. It's an heirloom. And I hated hoeing, thinning beets was bad. But they used to have what they called, well, it was not a segmented seed, that just one sprout would come out of a seed. There'd be multiple sprouts come out of a seed. So you'd have to go separate those and put them about 7 or 8 inches apart. And the rows looked like they went for miles.
So how much did you get paid?
It was by the row. And it depended on the length of the row. I don't know, maybe 50 cents a row.
Wow.
And it'd take you all day to do a row practically. And you'd start out standing up, you know, bent over. And then it wouldn't be too long and you'd be down on one knee. And then pretty soon you'd be on both knees. And then some kids would poop out and they'd be crawling along on their butt. My brothers contracted a field of beets to take care of one summer, and I helped them. And that, you know where Crumb Brothers is now. And then where the mill is, there used to be Globe Mills, it's Trenton Feed or something now. That big field in there, or that big area, that it used to be a field, and they contracted to thin and hoe and water and top.
How much money did they make?
I don't remember. I know this right after that, Dean went on his mission. I think he made enough money that summer off of that to go on his mission.
Where did he go?
He went to Southern California. That included, I think it was just a California mission, and it included part of Arizona and some of Nevada at that time. But he was in Santa Ana for most of his mission, and then they had the World's Fair in San Francisco, and he lucked out and was able to go up there and attend to the church display. That was in 1940, 40 or 41.
So was that your worst job too?
I think it was. And then Dad worked at the college at that time. By that time he was working up there as the head of the carpenters. And he got me a job. It was in 1943. The war was going full blast. And at that time there was hardly any civilian students. So they had lots of classrooms and stuff. And they brought in a bunch of Air Force. It was at that time it was the Army Air Corps and Marines, and trained them in flight instruction and other things. Anyway, I got a job in the cafeteria that fed those guys, and that washing dishes, of course. But they had a dishwasher, and
Well, that's good.
I got fired from that job for stealing a pie.
Did you deal it?
Well, yeah, I never told Dad about it. Miss Vermillion was the head of the thing.
That doesn't even sound like a real name.
Oh, it
It's
was.
like a character in a book.
And looking back on it, I guess she was a fairly decent-looking middle-aged woman, but I thought she was an old bag. Me and another kid got this pie, and now we've got it. What are we gonna, So we went in, we thought she'd never come in the restroom. So we went in the men's restroom to eat this pie. And I'll be damned if she didn't come in and catch us.
Why did she go in there?
I followed the crumbs, I guess, I don't know.
That's so funny.
But anyway, then what did I do? Oh, one summer I was water boy on a campus
For who?
for the college.
For the.
Just moving the water turning the water on and off and watering the dry spots and that kind of stuff. And then that was in 45. That was the year the war ended. But that spring, of course, the spring of 45 is when the war ended in Europe. And then when school was out in May, that's when I was a water boy for just a few weeks. And I met up with Chase Peterson, whose dad was the president of the college, and me and him worked together on the grounds. And his grandpa had a farm over in Randolph, and so we went over. He asked me if I'd like a job over there for the rest of the summer. So I went over there and worked on the ranch.
Were you married by then? Or?
Oh no, I was only 15 then.
Oh.
And I worked the rest of the summer over there. I was working there when they dropped the atomic bomb, and
Really?
nobody really knew what's an atomic bomb, And,
So do you remember what you were doing then? Like when you heard the news?
Well, what the deal was that the old man Nebeker, who was Chase's grandpa, had homesteaded a place there called South Eden. They still call it South Eden on the east side of Bear Lake. And we would stay there at night. There was Chase and Conrad and another Nebeker and me. And we were kind of the kids they didn't know what to do with. So we would sleep there at night, and then we'd get up in the morning, and the old lady Nebeker would fix us breakfast. And then they had an old Ford touring car, and we'd load that up with whatever they needed on the ranch over at Randolph, where you go up through Lake Town and over to Randolph. So we'd haul their supplies over early in the morning and then work on it with a hay crew and have our lunch, our midday meal there with a hay crew, and then drive back over to the east side of Bear Lake in the evening.
Well, that was probably awesome.
Well, yeah, I met some cowboys, real old cowboys. And see, gas was still rationed. They were still doing a lot of work with horses. And I really got fat that summer. Mrs. Nebeker would fix us pork chops for breakfast and pancakes and oatmeal, and that'd get us going. Then we get over to Randolph, and they had a man and his wife that lived in a big, big old house over there that made lunch for the hay crew. And that was always boiled beef. It didn't sound too good, but it was
That doesn't
tender.
sound good.
Boiled beef and potatoes and bread. And big bread puddings for dessert, and then you'd lay around for half hour and go back to work. And then we'd drive back over this way, and Mrs. Nebeker's daughter-in-law lived there. That was Chase's aunt, and she would make us supper, which was another big meal. And we were so wore out, we never went anywhere. We get back, we was so tired. As soon as supper was over with, whether it was light or not, we went to bed.
That's hard work. So how did you end up At Warren's then.
That's, you haven't got enough
All
time.
right.
Okay, well, okay, let's keep going. After that, that was 1945. And then I just had 2 or 3 odd jobs during high school, enough to keep my cars going. And then right out of high school, no, that was while, it was after that glorious year at college. I worked for a transport motor in Logan as a grease monkey. You know, in those days, cars had dozens of grease fittings, and you had to know where they all were to grease them. And they were the Plymouth DeSoto dealer, and I worked there. And then that's when I got the job at the diesel plant, and I worked there for till 1951. That was 2 years after we were married. And then I thought that was the gravy job of ever, working there. But I could see at that tender age that I was not going anywhere. I'd be doing the same thing 10, 15 years down the road as it was the day I walked in. It was an interesting job, tending to those big engines and you know, keeping the right load on the engines to match the demand of the electricity and so on. Anyway, they started to recruit for machinist trainees. That was the Korean War had just started, and they were desperate for people to work at Hillfield because they was getting a lot of World War II planes out of mothballs to use in Korea. And so I trained as a machinist, and I took it was only about 3 or 4 months at Utah State, machinist training, and then I went to work at Hillfield for a year. That's when we lived in Roy, in the big machine shop. Those 4 big hangars, they were there then. I worked in there. And then again, I could see working for the government wasn't my cup of tea. So after about a year of that, a little more than a year, a job opened up at the university in the old, what they call the Utah Scientific Research Foundation. And it's the spin-off is now the Research Foundation there in the park.
Oh, yeah.
But it was a lot different then. And I went to work there as a machinist. And I worked there for a couple of years, I think, something like that. And the funding ran out, and they just fired us all one day.
Oh, and you had kids and a wife.
Yeah, I had 3 kids. And about that time, they were advertising for machinists to work for Boeing. And so I went to Salt Lake and made application, and they accepted me.
And is that when you went to Seattle?
That's when we moved to Seattle. I went out there and lived there with my brother Lloyd for about 6 weeks. Kind of got established and got an apartment and sent for your grandma and the 3 kids. They took the train from, her dad took them up to Pocatello, put them on the train, and they come up. And we never did really like Seattle. And but I did real well at Boeing. I had several good promotions, had some interesting jobs as a machinist, and I even got my union card as a toolmaker, so, which was kind of a farce, but anyway, that's what I did. And they were building the B-52s then. They're just starting to build them. No computers,
No.
and they're still going. Best plane that the Air Force has ever had, and they're still in this. One didn't know what the hell a computer was. And that was in the 53, 54, and 55. And in 55, David was born, and I had the chance to come back here to go work. So, and I worked for a short time for Lundahl Ironworks as a machinist. And then a job opened up back up at the university in my old job, and I went up there. And that was not a very stable place because they were dependent on funding and this
Grants
kind of
and
stuff. And it was during that time that that plane crashed that I went out to look at. Anyway, there was a firm in Logan called Pack Manufacturing. He was actually the guy that had the Chrysler Plymouth dealership, but he also had a big, long building in back of his dealership. And he contracted with the government to refurbish all kinds of stuff. Engines, air conditioners, anything that the Army or the Air Force would use that need to be rebuilt and put back into service. And he also had a manufacturing business where he made filing systems for roll drawings and all kinds of stuff. And I worked there as a machinist for until 1958. And that was the year Archie was born. And by then, Thiokol had started up over in west of Brigham. They started in 1957 in October. That's when the Russians shot up Sputnik and everybody went nuts, and so we better get doing something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So they were pouring money into that place like there was no tomorrow. And
Is that how you guys ended up in Brigham?
yeah, and I went over there in March of '58. And I had my choice between being a machinist over there or going into inspection. And I walked through the machine shop and all I could see was rows of lathes turning carbon inserts, black, dirty carbon inserts that was the throat of the rockets.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't burn. It was
Right.
anyway, I thought, the hell was that? Those guys looked like they'd come out of a coal mine. So I thought, well, I got my choice between the two. They both pay the same, so I went into inspection. And I wasn't in there very long until they made me a supervisor over what we call the metal parts. Anything to do with anything but the propellant we processed. And that was a good job. I got some good supervisory experience there. And then I worked there from then until '62, and Thiokol established the Logan plant, where we built snow machines, which was a spin-off of what I was doing at the university anyway before.
Yeah.
So I transferred over here.
And then that's when you got in the house by Lawrence.
And that's when we got in the house at the lot by the Lions Lodge. And I worked there until '75. And then we went up to Pocatello and I worked for Bucyrus Erie until '78.
So wait, how did you move to the house up by Lions Lodge, move Pocatello, and move back?
Well, we leased the house
Oh, okay.
and bought another one up in Pocatello. And they were a good company, but there was not long for this world because of all the environment. They built mining equipment
Oh, yeah.
and still do, but there was a lot of problems with environmentalists, so I could see the handwriting on the wall. So I come back and actually went back to work for Thiokol for a year as an engineer,
Ooh.
and done the job at Borenzo